Hi, my name is Nick Eckert. I'm one of the directors here at GDPR 365. I want to welcome you to this webinar where I'm going to talk to you about the risks that businesses face related to the EU's data protection regulation and how GDPR 365 can help not only mitigate those risks but also improve an organization's data management practices. This webinar is primarily for our partners, though I think it will also be useful to clients in general. So if you're a potential GDPR 365 client, feel free to continue on. GDPR has been in the news a lot lately. Well, that and data protection. From when I'm doing this, mid-September, there was a Equifax hack that was reported. Facebook received a fine from the Spanish Data Supervisory Authority, and there's been hundreds, if not thousands, of news articles and press releases about the GDPR. So we all know what it is now. But the challenge of compliance has not decreased at all. And despite the awareness, not much has changed for most companies. And not much has changed since this article that I want to show you was published mid-August. I want to talk about it because if you had the chance to read it, maybe you noticed the tension related to GDPR that it highlighted. The article mentioned how companies like Cisco and HP and Microsoft and Facebook, all of the technology giants, are very concerned about becoming compliant by the May 2018 deadline, and that they were hiring large teams and spending millions on ensuring their compliance. At the same time, the article quoted Elizabeth Denham, who's the head of the UK's Information Commissioner's Office, which is the data protection authority in the UK, as saying she was optimistic that UK businesses would be ready for the data protection law because they were taking it seriously. So what those two things highlighted is the chasm that most companies find themselves peering across in relation to the data protection regulation. The only roadmap that companies have for compliance is the text of that regulation. And if any of you have bothered to read the text, it isn't clear. It's actually deliberately ambiguous. It's complex by design, and that's because the previous data protection directive, those of you who are old enough to know it like me, came out back in 1995, and it was totally outpaced by technology. So this regulation was drafted in such a way that it wouldn't be made redundant by technological innovation. It was written to be interpreted and applied. What that means is each organization needs to understand the regulation, digest it, and apply it to their organization. As a result, as you're probably all aware, there's been an entire industry of seminars and consultants that sprung up in order to help companies get across this chasm. The reality of that, though, is after the seminar is over, the attendee only understands what they need. If we want to continue with the chasm metaphor, only understands what they need to, what materials they need to build the bridge to get across the chasm. They don't have a plan for building the bridge. Or if a consultant has left them, they're in better shape. They have a plan, but they've still got to build the bridge themselves. So the seminars and the consultants, while they're a necessary step, they just really address the beginning of this challenge. Another part of the challenge towards compliance is actually understanding what technology to use. Let's be honest, data protection is a problem because it's a technological problem. And the only way to solve a technological problem is with a technological solution. I'm not saying technology is the only part of the solution, but it has to be a crucial part. And as this problem has been developing over the last 2 decades, companies have shown themselves to be extremely willing to spend on business-sponsored technology, anything that impacts revenue or customer satisfaction or reduces costs, all of those things. And that's led to this explosion of personal data that companies hold. But companies haven't been willing to spend on governance and security technology. As a result, these things languish and you get incidences like Equifax. And that's really a shame. The only way this tension is going to be resolved is if management gets buy-in on, people get management's buy-in on focusing on this underdeveloped tech stack. And finally, GDPR is helping to get some of that attention focused on the underdeveloped tech stack. So as a result, you've seen an explosion of companies that essentially are smelling the blood in the water related to data protection regulation. And so there's been this proliferation of suppliers offering GDPR compliant solutions. Sorry about moving that slide quickly forward. We'll get there in a second. What I want to say is that most of these solutions really just focus on a narrow slice of the GDPR. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because technology likes to solve specific problems. The challenge for companies then is understanding what technology they need to use to solve those problems. And for a company to understand that, they need to first understand how they process personal data. So who they hold personal data on, why they're processing that data, what actual data are they processing, how are they processing it, where are they processing it. So, I like to think of it as the who, why, what, how, and where of personal data. And so that sounds elementary, like a school, but few companies actually have a clear picture on this, and that's part of the technology challenge. So, and the reason for that is that oversight on this is difficult, and that's because the explosion, again, over the last 2 years of different departments collecting different personal data on different individuals for different purposes. A lot of companies will have the marketing department that's run out and sourced a marketing automation solution to help them target and retarget qualified leads. And the IT department might not have any oversight on who the supplier is, how it's being used, or what data is being collected, and what individuals it's held on. So you can see the challenge. In order to begin to understand the challenge, given the quality of personal data, quantity of personal data that's being collected, and quality actually in a lot of cases, because the GDPR is trying to get at both of those, and then this dispersion across the company, we think that there's a need to look at technology in a framework. And a way to do that is to break it up into 5 different domains of data protection software. So you have assessment software, an assessment domain, a governance domain, process and security and analysis. And each one of these domains can then be broken down into a further subset of solutions. So in assessments, you might have software that's doing data discovery and data mapping and offering data protection impact assessments. On the government side, it might be case management and compliance demonstration. On security side, it might be network and application security or a pseudonymization software. I think you get the idea. The thing is, not every company needs every one of these types of solutions, and each solution can actually potentially represent one or more providers. Some providers, like GDPR 365, can cover multiple solutions. I don't think there's any supplier that can actually provide all of the solutions here. So, explaining a little bit more about GDPR 365 and how we try and address it, we think that companies first need to understand what their risks are in relation to the GDPR. And the single biggest risk for an organization is obviously a sanction or a fine. So the ICO and not all of them, but the ICO certainly, which is the UK Data Protection Authority, has insisted that it'll be proportionate and rational as a regulator. That's the actual language it's used. It said that it won't aggressively go after businesses to levy fines except as a last resort. But the fact of the matter is that the budget of the ICO is funded by fines. Just this past summer, they issued over £750,000 in fines, and the data protection legislation, that law isn't even going into effect until the end of May 2018. And then you have some supervisory authorities, like those in Spain, just issued over €1 million fine to Facebook. So there are real risks, and companies need to think about it and think about, okay, what are the red flag risks? in relation to the GDPR. So we think those are essentially inability for a company to show its accountability, if they don't have documented oversights of their compliance activity, if they don't have records of processing activities, that's going to get them in trouble if they can't demonstrate that. If they don't have sufficient client notices, or if they have insufficient consent practices, or if they don't respond to data subject requests, any of these things could cause a data subject to go to a supervisory authority and raise a red flag. If they don't have sufficient data security in place, that's going to be a problem too. If a supervisory authority becomes aware of a data breach that hadn't been reported, that's potentially a problem. We also think a really big problem is and we're really concerned about this at GDPR 365, that companies are thinking of this entire exercise as a set it and forget it one-time exercise. It's not. To be compliant, you need to have processes in place in addition to being able to demonstrate compliance. So the high priority issues in relation to the GDPR are: how is a company going to support its GDPR compliance? They need to find out, do they need to appoint a data protection officer? If not, are they going to have a team? How are the responsibilities going to be shared, or who is the representative that's going to head it up in their organization? How can they demonstrate accountability across all of their processing activities? They need to look at their processes and data sharing so they can see if there's any cross-border data flows and make sure they've addressed that. And they need to make sure that they're prepared for data subjects exercising their data rights. So GDPR 365 tries to help across a lot of these different areas. So let me try and explain to you how we do that. We think that the solution begins with an understanding of what's required for organizing interdepartmental collaboration. So you need that management buy-in, and then you need to decide, do you have a DPO or a team or an individual who's going to be working with other people in your organizations? That's tricky, but once you get that done, then the implementation process, which is that post-consultancy process I spoke about at the end, when you're given the plan by the consultant, the implementation process can become very difficult. It can quickly cascade into mountain of tasks and emails and spreadsheets and meetings and frustrated staff and no simple way to have oversight in terms of the work in progress. So from an outset, GDPR 365 is trying to resolve that by using technology that can be used to essentially assign responsibility around data protection. So GDPR 365 is a secure cloud-based service. Companies start with a self-assessment and then work through a data mapping exercise. And GDPR 365 then uses that to customize a set of compliance tools, which are like apps, which then break down the compliance process by organizing it into clear, simple, and assignable tasks. So it's been designed for companies, but I want you to be clear to understand that it's also designed for consultants and data protection officers, because we appreciate that a lot of companies are going to be using external consultants to help with that data mapping process to get the plan in place. And they might even have those consultants go on and help with implementation, or they might have an external DPO. So GDPR 365 uses a framework where all of those efforts can be recorded. So they help not only with the initial compliance, but there's afterwards an existing ongoing framework that can be used to demonstrate the ongoing compliance for years into the future. So as I said, it begins with that self-assessment and the data mapping exercise, where GDPR 365 helps companies map that personal data flow through their organizations, from the data subjects to what types of personal data they hold, how it's being collected, where it's being processed, and have the ability to document what are the purposes for which that personal data is being used, what are the legal justifications around it, what are the retention periods of that data, who's got access rights to it, and any external processing or sharing of that personal data, so it all can be seen, and it can also be seen visually in a map. And that record of data processing is then used, as I said, to customize the rest of GDPR 365, so each company has its own unique personalized compliance and governance tools. And what are those tools? So they're all risk reduction tools, as I said at the beginning. So it's a customized set of compliance questionnaires in IT security or marketing and data collection and HR practices and all these things that would allow a company to go through a gap analysis to understand where they need to improve their data protection areas, where they might need to find software solutions, and then to demonstrate it by recording what they've done against the questionnaire. They can easily bring individuals into the process. Those individuals can collaborate and post their comments against the questionnaire too. So the entire audit trail of what's been done is related to those particular tasks. It also has a log of processors and data recipients, so that you have a complete oversight on what personal data is shared with third parties and what legal justifications there are. All of these things help. They allow an organization to provide answers quickly to data subjects or to suppliers or even to supervisory authorities should they come about. But it doesn't stop there. GDPR customizes privacy notices based upon the records of processing and the data mapping exercise. We then host those. You can use those on your website, so they're linked. That way, if any changes are made to the data mapping or the records of processing, those changes are made automatically to the privacy notices and are published across your website to ensure that those notices are always correct. In addition, GDPR 365 also generates customized internal policies based upon what your needs are as an organization and customized training documents. You can then distribute those and get digital acknowledgement from staff and contractors and processors that they've read and accepted your policies. And all of those policies and notices that are created by GDPR 365, they're created based upon the customized data that you put in, but you can further modify those based upon a company's needs. One of the other areas of risk reduction that we address is we provide a case management tool for managing data subject requests to make sure that they're responded to in the required time frame, to make sure they don't get lost in normal support processes. Because if a data subject complains to a supervisory authority, that's definitely a red flag. In addition to that, we also provide a breach incident management log that helps you determine whether or not the supervisory authority needs to be made aware of the breach, and whether or not data subjects also need to be notified. And maybe the most important part overall of this is that GDPR 365 provides reports that give visibility and show accountability, so that individuals responsible for the implementation or ongoing compliance of the data protection laws can see what issues are open, what issues have been resolved. Management can go in and get oversight on what the overall state of compliance is. So that's a really quick overview in terms of what the risks are and how we at GDPR 365 are trying to identify those. I hope it gives you some insights into the overall solution, and you can use that to communicate to your clients. I think as a final bookend, I'd just like to say that it all begins with good data practices. And while much of that is technical, it's also about creating an awareness and a culture of data protection. And a cloud-based hub like GDPR 365 that can support cross-departmental and even cross-supplier collaboration on data protection can not only give you oversight, but it can also provide insurance and the ability to demonstrate compliance internally and externally, and that's pretty powerful. So thanks for your time. I hope this is interesting. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Thanks.